There's a small shift in the way a man talks, not about you, but around you, that reveals he's falling in love, long before he's ready to say those words out loud. It's not a compliment. It's not a confession. It's something so subtle that most people hear it dozens of times without ever noticing what it actually means. Today, we're uncovering exactly what that one thing is, why psychologists consider it one of the most reliable signs of falling in love there is, and how to start noticing it in your own relationship. Stay until the end, because once you hear this explained, you'll start catching it everywhere. Let's get into it. Before the reveal, let's talk about why this particular sign matters so much. Most advice about falling in love focuses on emotional cues, the way he looks at you, how much he texts, whether he seems excited to see you. Those things matter, but they're also fairly easy to perform, even by someone who's only mildly interested. Excitement in the early stages of dating is common. It doesn't always reflect something deeper happening underneath. Chemistry can be real and still be temporary. Attraction can be genuine and still not translate into lasting emotional investment. This is exactly why so many women end up confused months into a relationship that felt electric at the start, but never seemed to deepen into something more solid. Linguists and psychologists who study relationships have found something more revealing hiding in plain sight. The language people use, especially the small, automatic word choices they don't consciously think about, tends to reveal emotional reality more honestly than deliberate compliments or declarations ever could. Because language habits are largely unconscious, they're remarkably hard to fake convincingly over time. Think about it this way. If someone asked you to consciously perform affection, you could probably do it convincingly for an evening, maybe even for a few weeks. But could you consistently, accurately track and adjust your pronouns across hundreds of casual conversations, over months, without slipping back into old patterns unless the underlying feeling was actually driving it? Almost no one could sustain that level of conscious monitoring. Which is exactly why this sign works so well. It's not something people manage to perform. It's something that happens to them as a byproduct of how their mind is actually processing the relationship. So let's talk about what this specific shift looks like. Here it is. A man who's genuinely falling in love starts using we language naturally, without prompting, often before he's consciously aware he's doing it. We should check out that new place. What are we doing this weekend? I feel like we've been so busy lately. Notice how these sentences don't require any grand context. They're small, automatic, almost throwaway comments, and that's exactly why they matter so much. He's not performing togetherness. His brain has simply started categorizing the two of you as a shared unit, and his language is following along, unconsciously. This ties into something psychologists call relational identity, the process by which someone gradually incorporates another person into their sense of self and daily life. Early in dating, most people mentally categorize a partner as separate. Someone they see, someone they like, but still fundamentally over there, outside their own identity. As real emotional attachment develops, that mental boundary softens. The other person starts to feel less like someone he interacts with, and more like part of how he defines his own life and routine. And nothing reveals that shift more honestly than language, because pronouns are one of the last things people consciously monitor when they speak. Let's break down what this actually sounds like in real conversations. He starts making plans in we language before you've actually agreed to anything. We could go there next month, not would you want to go there with me sometime. The assumption of togetherness is baked into the sentence itself, not proposed as a question. He describes shared experiences using we, even in casual retellings to other people. Telling a friend about the weekend, he says, we went to that new restaurant rather than I went with her. This might seem like a small linguistic detail, but it reflects how he's actually organizing the memory in his own mind as a shared experience, not a separate one that happened to include you. He starts referring to problems or stress as shared, even when they're technically only his. We've had such a hectic month, when really it's mostly been his work schedule that's been hectic. This reflects an emotional folding in. Your life and his life are starting to feel like one continuous experience to him, not two separate tracks running in parallel. He starts using we when talking about preferences and identity, not just plans. We're not really morning people, or we don't love big crowds. Notice how this goes beyond scheduling. He's now describing shared traits and tendencies, as if your preferences and his have started to merge into a joint identity, even in areas that have nothing to do with logistics. He starts using our instead of my for things that are technically still just his, our apartment, even if only his name is on the lease, or our Sunday routine, describing something that started as just his habit before you were part of the picture. This kind of language absorption is subtle, but it reflects something significant. He's mentally folded pieces of his individual life into a shared narrative, without ever consciously deciding to do so. None of these moments are dramatic on their own. That's exactly the point. This sign doesn't show up as a big, obvious declaration. It shows up as dozens of tiny, repeated linguistic choices that together reveal something words alone never could. He's already started thinking of the two of you as one story, not two. Here's why psychologists and linguists consider this such a dependable indicator, arguably more reliable than almost anything a man could consciously say. Conscious speech, compliments, declarations, romantic statements passes through a filter. People think about what they're saying, especially in the early stages of a relationship, when they're aware of the impression they're making. But casual, automatic language, the pronouns people default to without thinking, bypasses that filter almost entirely. That's precisely why it's so revealing. It shows what someone actually believes on some level, not just what they've decided to say out loud. There's actually a broader body of research behind this idea. Psychologists who study close relationships have looked at what's sometimes called the plural pronoun effect, the tendency for people in genuinely close, securely bonded relationships to naturally increase their use of we language over time, while people in more distant or troubled relationships tend to stay anchored in I and you. Some of this research has even looked at couples during conflict, finding that partners who used more we language while working through disagreements tended to report higher relationship satisfaction and were more likely to resolve the conflict collaboratively, rather than adversarially. The underlying idea is consistent. Pronoun use isn't just grammar, it's a window into how connected two people actually feel to one another beneath the surface. This is also why the absence of this shift is worth paying attention to, especially over time. If a relationship has gone on for months and his language still consistently separates me and you, rather than sliding naturally into we, that doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong. Some people are simply more linguistically reserved. But it is useful information, especially paired with other signs, about how fully he's emotionally integrated the relationship into his sense of identity. The goal here isn't to obsess over every sentence he says, scanning for pronouns like a detective. It's simply to notice, casually, over time, whether we has started slipping into his vocabulary on its own. Because when it does, it's one of the most honest signs there is that something real is happening underneath. Before we wrap up, it's worth addressing one common misconception about this sign, because it's easy to misread. Some people assume that if a man doesn't use we language often, it automatically means he's not invested. That's not quite accurate. Some men are simply more linguistically reserved by nature, or come from communication styles, families, or cultures where that kind of language shift happens more slowly, or shows up in different ways entirely, through actions rather than pronouns, for instance. What matters most isn't a single sentence or even a single conversation. It's the overall trajectory. Is his language slowly, naturally drifting toward inclusion over time, even if it's subtle? Or has it stayed rigidly separate for months, with no shift at all, regardless of how close you've become? The direction of change tends to matter more than the current state at any single moment. It's also worth remembering that this sign works best in combination with everything else you already know about a relationship: consistency, effort, vulnerability. No single sign, including this one, should be treated as absolute proof on its own. But paired with everything else, this particular shift is one of the most honest, hardest to fake windows into what's actually happening beneath the surface. One last thing before we wrap up, because this matters. Don't try to engineer this shift by using "we" language yourself first, hoping he'll mirror it back to you. This sign only means something when it happens naturally, as a genuine reflection of how he's actually processing the relationship internally. If you introduce "we" language early, and he starts mirroring it back simply out of social politeness or conversational rhythm, that mirroring doesn't carry the same psychological weight. People often unconsciously match the language of whoever they're talking to, regardless of how they actually feel. This is a well-documented conversational pattern, sometimes called linguistic mirroring, and it happens automatically in almost any conversation, close relationship or not. So the most useful approach here isn't to test him, or introduce the language yourself and watch for a reaction. It's simply to pay attention, naturally, to what he says when he's not being prompted or led, in casual conversation, when he's telling a story to a friend, when he's making a passing comment about weekend plans. That's where the real signal lies, uncontaminated by anything you might have introduced into the conversation. Let's bring it all together. 1. Early on, his language stays separate. Language reflecting genuinely separate lives, which is completely normal. 2. Falling in love shows up as a quiet shift toward "we" language, used naturally and unprompted. 3. He starts proposing plans with the assumption of togetherness already built in. 4. He describes shared experiences to others using "we," reflecting how he's organizing the memory internally. 5. He starts folding shared life, stress, and even preferences into "we" language, even when technically it was only his to begin with. This is the sign that speaks louder than any romantic declaration. Not what he says about his feelings, but the quiet, unconscious way his language has already started including you as part of his story. It doesn't arrive all at once, and it doesn't need to. What matters is the direction it's moving in, and whether, little by little, "I" is starting to sound less natural to him than "we." If this gave you a new way to notice real emotional investment, that's exactly why this channel exists. We explore the hidden psychology behind love, attraction, and human behavior, the small, often invisible patterns that are true, but rarely explained clearly anywhere else. Understanding signs like this one isn't about becoming hyperanalytical in your relationships. It's about learning to trust what you're already sensing and having the language to explain why you're sensing it. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we release new psychology and relationship insights every week. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you noticed this shift happen in your relationship? Drop a comment and let me know. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.